Hey, folks, meaning specifically YouTube. Welcome to today's Law of Self-Defense show, a very special YouTube-specific pre-recorded show from Law of Self-Defense. I am, of course, attorney Andrew Branca from Law of Self-Defense. Thank you so very much. That's, as always, greatly appreciated. So why is this an unusual show? Well, yesterday, I was live streaming a show about Alec Baldwin. Alec Baldwin having been re-indicted on charges of manslaughter for the shooting death of Helena Hutchins on the set of Rust. And I was about 45 minutes or so into the live stream when I got this sudden email notification from YouTube, and the live stream was ended by YouTube. Let me blow this up a little bit. And the notification reads, "Hi, Law of Self-Defense. We wanted to let you know our team reviewed your content." This is in the midst of the live stream, halfway through the live stream. "And we think it violates our firearms policy. We know you may not have realized this was a violation of our policies, so we're not going to strike. We're not applying a strike to your channel. However, we have removed the following content from the YouTube," and it was yesterday's live stream, in the middle of the live stream. And they said, you can see the time it occurred. You can see an example at 45 minutes into the live stream. Well, what they're referring to is I had, as part of the live stream, I had played pre-recorded content from YouTube, a video from my buddy, Brendan Herrera, goes by the AK Guy, has a gun channel on YouTube, 3.5 million subscribers, something to that effect. I know Brendan personally. This is him and I. And he, in his video, was showing how a duplicate of the revolver used by Alec Baldwin in this tragic event could not be fired without the trigger being depressed. So that's a key issue here in this case, because Alec Baldwin claims that he never touched the trigger, even though we have photos of him doing exactly that. I think I have one right here. When he's rehearsing for this quick draw in the church, you can see his finger is on the trigger. He does it repeatedly in his little rehearsal dinner. So I was playing Brandon's video, and apparently they don't like that. Now, I'm well aware that YouTube does not want me handling guns during a live stream. I was unaware that you couldn't play pre-recorded video of someone else handling a gun on a live stream. So the handling of the gun's not live. It's on pre-recorded video. But anyway, that's the reason they gave for why they dumped my live stream halfway through. So the people watching on Rumble and Twitter, and of course our Law of Self-Defense members, their viewing was not interrupted, but all of you on YouTube, that was the end of the video for you. So I'm preparing this altered version in a pre-recorded fashion for YouTube, where I'm not displaying the video from Brendan Herrera. If you'd like to see that video of Brandon testing a duplicate of the Alec Baldwin Colt revolver, and I encourage you to do that, I've set up a shortcut link. You can see it here in the bottom of the screen. lawofselfdefense.com/Brandon will get you right there. I should also mention that Brandon is currently running for Congress. He's running against a anti-gun rhino Republican down in Texas, and I've personally contributed, I would say, substantial funds to Brandon's election campaign. I would urge you to check out his website, BrandonHerreraForCongress.com. Look at his positions. I think he'd be a great addition for the pro-Second Amendment community to have in Congress, not just for Texas, but for everybody else. And maybe you'll want to support Brandon as well. That's Brandon Herrera for Congress. Also, during the course of yesterday's show, I heard in the comments that my good friend Ian Runkle had also done his own video just like the night before, using a replica of the Alec Baldwin revolver. This is Ian on the right here, same event of the photo I just showed you with me and Brandon, the Elf King of Canada. Great lawyer, great YouTube, has great insight on the law, and a gun guy. And he did his own video with a replica, a duplicate of the Alec Baldwin gun, similar to that of Brandon, and came to the same conclusions. The gun will not fire a round without the trigger being depressed. I have a shortcut to that video as well on YouTube, lawofselfdefense.com/Ian, IAN, lawofselfdefense.com/Ian will get you right to his webpage, and you should subscribe to his channel when you get there. All right, so I think that's all I need for an introduction. So now we're going to transition into yesterday's content, and I certainly hope you enjoy the show. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to today's impromptu episode of the Law of Self-Defense. I was not planning to do a show today. As those of you who watched yesterday would know, I notified everybody there would be no show until Monday. But here we are, and we're here because of some breaking news. And that breaking news is that the actor Alec Baldwin has once again been indicted in New Mexico over the October 2021 shooting death of cinematographer Halyna Hutchins on the set of Rust. So I think that's a just indictment. I think it's what should have happened. And therefore, I'm glad to see it. So I figured I'd take today to give a brief overview of kind of the facts of the case. There's a lot of misconceptions, misperceptions about how the law should apply here. Why aren't other people, instead of Alec Baldwin, responsible? Why he didn't do anything wrong? And I've written about this a great deal. Now, if you look under my name on the screen here, you'll see there's a link, lawofselfdefense.com/Adam, Alec. Well, lawofselfdefense.com/Baldwin. And if you go to that page, we have aggregated all the blog posts and videos I've previously done on this Baldwin shooting, all the way down to one I did the day after the event. The event happened October 21st, 2021. The news broke. I read about it the following day and did my first blog post about it there. Of course, we didn't have a lot of facts. Now, today I'm going to step through a few of these. Some of these are just videos. There's no text. So I'm not going to replay videos for all of you. This is your video. I'm doing it right now. I would recommend you take a look at this one in particular. And by the way, this is accessible to everyone. lawofselfdefense.com/Baldwin, because of the high degree of public interest in this case. I did an interview with my buddy Adam Baldwin about how actors are supposed to handle guns on movie sets. Adam, of course, has done a ton of movies involving firearms. He was kind enough to share with me the SAG, Screen Actors Guild, guidelines for safety on a set, including firearm safety. And we spent an hour or so talking through the reality of handling guns on a movie set. So that was particularly informative to me. I've never done movies. I've done a little bit of TV, but I was the Best Defense TV show on the Outdoor Channel. I was a legal expert on self-defense law there, and sometimes on set for a couple of years. That was great fun. But I've never done movies, so it was great to get that movie insight from him. So lawofselfdefense.com/Baldwin. Today's show will also be added to this once we've finished the post-production. So I'm not going to go through all that prior analysis, but I do want to step through some of it, some of it that has written content that we can just filter through quickly. By the way, this is just about I believe it's the 1-year anniversary from when the New Mexico prosecutor first announced that she would be charging Alec Baldwin with manslaughter for the death of Halyna Hutchins. Now, this has been a complicated political affair. The first prosecutor on this case took a year or so to decide she wanted to charge him with manslaughter. Then after that, she appointed some kind of special prosecutor. Somebody was also running for office at the same time, and that was inappropriate. So that indictment was done away with. Now a new special prosecutor has been appointed, Carrie Morrissey, and she's the one who's filed the new indictment. And the new indictment is right here. So let's take a look. It's only one page. It's very short. Let's read what she has to say. Carrie Morrissey, special prosecutor appointed in this case. Let's see. Alec Ray Baldwin, defendant, charge. involuntary manslaughter. And what we mean here by involuntary manslaughter is reckless manslaughter. And I'll get into what recklessness means in a moment. Count 1, involuntary manslaughter, negligent use of a firearm. On or about October 21st, 2021 in Santa Fe County, New Mexico, blah, 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 blah. The above-named defendant did cause the death of Halyna Hutchins in the commission of negligent use of a firearm in unlawful act, which did not amount to a felony, a fourth-degree felony, contrary to NMSA 1978, Section 32(3)B. Or in the alternative, count 1, involuntary manslaughter without due caution or circumspection, on or about October 21st, 2021 in Santa Fe County, state of New Mexico. The above-named defendant did cause the death of Halyna Hutchins by an act committed with the total disregard or indifference for the safety of others, and the act was such that an ordinary person would anticipate that death might occur under the circumstances. That's a fourth-degree felony, contrary to 32(3)B. Now, believe it or not, a fourth-degree felony, this involuntary manslaughter charge, is only good for 18 months, a maximum of 18 months and a $5,000 fine under New Mexico law. She names some witnesses. She certifies this is a true bill indictment, and Carrie T. Morrissey, special prosecutor, date 1/19/2024, so just yesterday, and it's signed by the foreperson of the grand jury and approved by the special prosecutor. And as we'll see, when we'll look at the New Mexico manslaughter statute, and for involuntary manslaughter, there are two paths to get there. One is when you kill someone in the commission of an unlawful act, where that unlawful act is not itself a felony. If you're committing a felony and you kill someone in the course of the felony, then it would be felony murder. But if you're committing an unlawful act that's a misdemeanor and kill someone in the progress of that, then it's this form of involuntary manslaughter, commission of an unlawful act that was not a felony. Or the other way you could get there, and in the commission of the unlawful act here is the crime of negligent use of a firearm, which is a separate criminal violation under New Mexico law. The alternative way to get to involuntary manslaughter is to be engaged in a lawful act, but without due cause or circumspection, without some kind of, and you cause the death of someone, and the lawful act was done without due caution or circumspection, meaning it was done in a reckless manner. So that is the indictment, and we'll talk all about recklessness and all this stuff moving forward, and what the differences are between accident, negligent, recklessness, and intent. So I don't think anyone is arguing that this was an intentional killing, that Alec Baldwin wanted Halyna Hutchins to be killed. For those weak on the facts, this was on the movie set of an independent film called Rust, a Western. Halyna Hutchins was the cinematographer on the set. Alec Baldwin was by far the biggest star in the movie. They were filming a scene in a church on set. Of course, Alec Baldwin's wearing Western gear, and he's supposed to be quickly cross-drawing his Colt revolver and firing around at some kind of aggressor. Of course, what he's actually facing is a camera, cinematographer Halyna Hutchins, and a assistant director who would also be injured, but not killed by the same bullet that killed Halyna Hutchins. So those are the initial facts. So let's turn now to the first blog post I did on this tragic event. And that occurred the day after the event. So the shooting happened October 21st. I wrote this blog post on October 22nd. We didn't have a lot of facts. So I'm wondering, Alec Baldwin shoots a woman dead. Could it be an innocent accident or involuntary manslaughter? And I actually explore more options than that, but I was just keeping the headline short. And I did come back and add an update later as more information had become available down the road. Update, it would appear that this tragic event, as new facts continue to be revealed, is a pretty textbook case of involuntary manslaughter under New Mexico law. Per the New Mexico Supreme Court, quote, all that is necessary to establish for involuntary manslaughter by the use of a loaded firearm is that a defendant had in his hands a gun which at some time had been loaded, and that he handled it, whether drunk, drinking, or sober, without due causation and circumspection, and that death resulted. Close quote. State v. Gilliam, 1955, New Mexico Supreme Court case. Rather on point here. Let's see. I've already described the facts. So let's talk about, could this have been an accident? Could this have been an accident? What is an accident? An accident is when we have a negative outcome from someone's conduct, but that negative outcome would have been completely unforeseeable to the person who engaged in the conduct. And an example I often use is you visit your elderly aunt in her apartment building. She's on the second floor. She asks you to move a heavy bureau for her. You're a strong young man, so of course you agree to help out your aunt. You pick up the bureau from one side of the room, put it down where she wants in the other side of the room, and unbeknownst to you, unknowable to you, the floor joists are rotten. The heavy bureau crashes through the floor and kills another old lady in the apartment below. That would be an accident. You had a bad outcome. You had a death of an innocent person, certainly not justified as self-defense, obviously, but it was completely unforeseeable to you that that would happen. If it's an accident, if in fact the negative outcome was completely unforeseeable, there is no legal liability. There's no civil liability. There's no criminal liability. An accident is a legal defense that your lawyer would raise at trial, just like they would raise the legal defense of self-defense, for example. So it's a specific legal defense that has specific elements that would be argued at trial. The next relevant mental state that could apply here would be one of negligence. Negligence is where you're creating a risk of harm to other people and the bad outcome occurs. But under negligence, you did not have a conscious awareness of the risk. You should have had an awareness of the risk. So a reasonable and prudent person would have known they were creating this risk, and you didn't. When that mental state exists, we have what's called negligence. You have a duty, a general duty not to harm others, and you do it in a negligent way, you have civil liability for the damages. You don't have criminal liability, but you do have civil liability. In this case, that could be a wrongful death suit on the part of Helena Hutchins' family, for example. But under negligence, if everyone agrees it's negligence, there is no criminal responsibility. There is no role for a prosecution. Here's the trouble with trying to argue pure negligence in this case. Pure negligence doesn't apply if you're engaged in an inherently dangerous activity. So there are things human beings do that are inherently dangerous. Demolition of buildings, use of explosives, dangerous chemicals, and firearms. These are all things that, if done improperly, can readily kill people. And they're obviously inherently dangerous activities. Everyone knows that guns are dangerous, that bullets come out and kill people. And if you're engaged in inherently dangerous activity and you engage in negligence, that negligence automatically gets bumped up a level to recklessness. What is recklessness? Recklessness is different than negligence. Negligence, you didn't know you were creating a risk of harm to others, but you should have. Recklessness is where you know you were creating an unjustified risk of harm to others, and you do it anyway, and a bad result happens. Classic example of this would be drunk driving. So when you're operating, you got drunk. If you operate a vehicle drunk, you're creating an unjustified risk of death to others. Now, you're not intending to run anybody over on the way home. You just want to get home. But you are aware you're running the risk, and you do the conduct anyway, and you run some over and kill them. That would be a reckless killing. You're aware of the risk, and you ignore it. That's the core of recklessness. Recklessness does carry criminal liability. In the context of manslaughter, that would give rise to involuntary manslaughter, like in the drunk driving case. You weren't intending to harm anyone, but the recklessness creates the risk, and you deliberately ignored that risk, consciously ignored that risk. That's reckless conduct. And that gives rise to criminal liability. Now, in this case, you might say, well, why would it bump from negligence to recklessness? And that's because when you're handling a gun is an inherently dangerous instrument. You can't pretend you didn't know that you were creating a risk of death, because everyone knows guns kill people. Guns are deadly weapons. So it's impossible to argue that, well, sure, a reasonable person would have known, but I wasn't thinking about it at the time. No. When you're engaged in inherently dangerous activity, as the New Mexico statute says, without due care and circumspection, that's recklessness. And if someone dies as a result, that's a reckless killing, meaning involuntary manslaughter. That's what involuntary manslaughter is, a reckless killing. And again, that creates legal liability. So again, this is the day after the event when I'm writing this. We don't have a lot of facts, but so it could have been an accident. What might an accident have looked like? It could be that the gun was defective. There was something wrong with the gun where if you swing it quickly without touching the trigger, if you swing it quickly, the gun just discharges. Well, this gun was tested, so that's not what happened here. It could be where Alec Baldwin is holding the gun in a safe manner, and a piece of the set collapses on him, and the shock of being struck by this collapsing set causes him involuntarily to clench on the gun and discharge the gun. Okay, I think that would be a fair example of accident, but that's not what happened here. And we'll have a video of a buddy of mine, Brandon Herrera, who did a test of an identical gun to this and shows that it could not have been discharged but for the trigger being pulled. And that's also what the FBI concluded when they tested the gun. Let's see. What might negligence have looked like here? Negligence could be if Alec Baldwin discharged the gun intentionally, but he shot it into the ground. And he thought that would be a good effect for the movie. Now, we all know if you shoot bullets into the ground, they can skip up. Right? I certainly wouldn't want someone shooting at the ground near me. So a reasonable person would know, hey, if I do this, that the bullet might still continue on and hurt somebody. And Alec Baldwin might say, well, I had no idea about that. I thought the bullet would just bury itself in the ground. So a reasonable person would have known the risk, but Alec wasn't consciously thinking of it. That could be negligence. That's not what happened here either. What does recklessness look like? Recklessness looks a lot like what happened here. That Alec Baldwin was holding what he knew to be a real gun, and he pointed it at Halyna Hutchins. Now, I think there's good evidence to indicate that he also pulled the trigger. The gun that was tested, that was used in this tragic event, was tested by the FBI. They concluded it would not discharge without the trigger being pulled. There's photographs that we'll see today of Alec Baldwin rehearsing his presentation of the revolver, and every time he does it, he's got his finger on the trigger. That allows for an inference that he had a finger on the trigger this time too. When you point a real gun at another human being, whether or not you discharge a trigger, you know that's dangerous. You know that creates a risk, an unjustified risk of death to others. Do you imagine if the scene called for Alec Baldwin to point that gun at his own head, he would not have made sure there were no live rounds in the gun? He could have done that here. And he didn't do that. Okay, so that was the first article I did. Next, just a few days later, 3 days later, October 25th, we had more data, and it begins to look a lot like involuntary manslaughter. Alec Baldwin was the person who was manipulating the gun that fired the projectile that killed Miss Hutchins. The gun discharged because the trigger was depressed by Baldwin and not because of some defect in the weapon. I think there's evidence to support that. Frankly, I don't think the trigger press is required for involuntary manslaughter here. That the muzzle of the weapon was directed at Miss Hutchins by Baldwin when it fired, so she was not killed by some unpredictable ricochet, and we know that it was, in fact, pointed at her. That the gun contained a live round that killed her. We know that's true. That Baldwin had the opportunity to inspect the weapon for live ammo before he directed it at her. I don't even think this is required for involuntary manslaughter, but he did, in fact, have the opportunity. And of course, there's no justification for the shooting, that this was not something like self-defense. And obviously, we know that's the case too. So here's the relevant New Mexico statute on manslaughter, 32.3. Manslaughter is the Sorry about that, but I was just summarizing facts. Manslaughter is the unlawful killing of a human being without malice. If there's malice, it's either murder or voluntary manslaughter. But without malice, involuntary manslaughter consists of manslaughter committed in the commission of a lawful act that might produce death without due caution or circumspection. So here I was only exploring one branch of involuntary manslaughter under New Mexico law, the commission of a lawful act without due care and circumspection. There is the other branch, which is the commission of an unlawful act. The unlawful act in this case being negligent use of a firearm. That would also get you to involuntary manslaughter. I talk here about inherently dangerous instruments and how that creates strict liability when you're handling those, and guns are included in those. I talk about the 4 rules of gun safety. All guns are presumed to be loaded until the gun handler personally verifies otherwise. Now, there are times when you can know a gun is unloaded. You have to do that if you're taking the gun apart for cleaning, for example. But you personally verify that the gun is unloaded while it's in your hand. And you only have that belief that it's unloaded while the gun remains in your hand. If you put the gun down and then pick it up again, you check it again to make sure it's unloaded. And at all other times, other than when you've personally ensured that it's unloaded, you have to presume that it's loaded. Rule number 2, never point the muzzle of a firearm at anything you're not willing to kill or destroy. Well, we know the muzzle was pointed directly at Helena Hutchins. Rule number 3, never press the trigger of a firearm unless you intend for it to fire a bullet from the barrel. Again, I think there's good evidence that Baldwin had his finger on the trigger here. Know your target and what is beyond your target. Now, that would only really apply if we had an intentional shooting here, which I don't believe is the case. I think it's a reckless shooting. But the beauty of these rules is that they're redundant. You really have to violate a combination of them before you're in trouble, before a bad outcome happens, right? If you fail to ensure the gun's not loaded, but you keep it pointed in a safe direction, well, then if it goes off, nobody's hurt. Or if you don't put your finger on the trigger, it doesn't discharge, nobody's hurt. If you point the muzzle of the firearm at something you don't want to kill or destroy, but you made sure it was not loaded and you don't touch the trigger, you don't have a bad outcome. If you press the trigger of the gun, but you made sure it was not loaded and it was pointed in a safe direction, you don't have a bad outcome. So you have to violate a combination of these 4 simple rules. Here's a look at the New Mexico jury instruction on involuntary manslaughter. And the jury would be instructed, for you to find the defendant guilty of involuntary manslaughter, the state must prove to your satisfaction, beyond a reasonable doubt, each of the following elements of the crime. That Alec Baldwin pointed a loaded firearm at Miss Hutchins and depressed the trigger, firing a bullet into her. That's true. Alec Baldwin should have known of the danger involved by his actions. We know pointing a real gun at people is dangerous. Alec Baldwin acted with a willful disregard for the safety of others. Well, if he knew and he did it anyway, that's the willful disregard. Alec Baldwin's act caused the death of Miss Hutchins. No, that's not contested. And it took place in New Mexico on or about the 21st day of October, 2021. These are all strongly supported by the evidence. By the way, people keep saying, well, what about the armorer? She's the one that let bullets on the set. Why shouldn't she be held accountable? Well, this is a misconception. She should be held accountable. But just because one person has fault doesn't remove the fault of other people. It's quite possible there's a lot of people here. In fact, an assistant director, I believe, was also criminally charged in this case and came to some kind of plea agreement. So multiple people could have done things wrong. That's common in these kinds of tragic events where there's a cascade of failures. It's not simply one person's fault. So those other people should be held accountable. But them being held accountable, them having fault, does not erase Alec Baldwin's recklessness. He's still responsible for his own conduct. In fact, the other people have an argument, a defense, what's called intervening cause. That there was an intervening cause between what they did wrong and the bad outcome. And the bad outcome would not have happened but for the intervening cause. If the intervening cause had not occurred, their misconduct would not have resulted in the bad outcome. And look at the armorer, for example. You can say, well, her misconduct was allowing live ammo on the set. Fair enough. But her allowing live ammo on the set is not the cause of the death of Halyna Hutchins without Alec Baldwin pointing the muzzle of the gun at Halyna Hutchins. That's an intervening event. So while those other people may well have legal liability, criminal liability, in fact, the armorer is being criminally prosecuted, they have a defense that Alec Baldwin doesn't have. Because the ultimate responsibility for how, when, and where a gun is discharged is in the hands of the person who's holding the gun. Nobody else pointed that muzzle at Halyna Hutchins. Nobody else arguably pressed the trigger, cocked the hammer. Certainly, the gun absolutely cannot fire without the hammer cocked. It's a single action weapon. So this notion that, well, other people are responsible, that does nothing to clear Alec Baldwin of responsibility, his personal responsibility. In fact, there is case law on this. Make this bigger. Does it matter that it wasn't Alec Baldwin who put the bullet in the gun? Nope. New Mexico Supreme Court tells us it could have made no difference to the trial of a charge of involuntary manslaughter as to who loaded the gun. All that is necessary to establish for involuntary manslaughter by the use of a loaded firearm is that a defendant had in his hands a gun, which at some time had been loaded by somebody, and that he handled it without due caution and circumspection, and that death resulted. That's New Mexico Supreme Court case law exactly on this point. And here I talk about what other things other people might have done wrong. And people always say, but he's just an actor. He's just an actor. All right, well, for one thing, he's an actor with 30 years of experience handling guns on sets. He's been trained on gun safety for every one of those movies, TV shows where he was handling a gun. Every single one. So that being an actor is not going to help him. Second of all, we're all presumed, I don't care how stupid an adult are, you're presumed, assuming you're at least mentally competent, you're presumed to know that guns are dangerous. They're inherently dangerous instruments. And you'll notice that New Mexico statute on manslaughter doesn't include the words, unless you're an actor. Being an actor does not relieve you of liability under New Mexico criminal law. Being a member of the Screen Actors Guild doesn't give you different criminal liability than the rest of us. So it's nonsense. Then I talk about whether or not he will be charged with involuntary manslaughter. Of course, ultimately he will. It'll be dismissed, and now it's back again, which is why we're talking about this. But here I'm talking about how much politics is involved. A big part of the politics here is that this area of New Mexico would love to have more movie business. And of course, it may be perceived that they're less likely to get more movie business if they prosecute one of the biggest actors in the movie industry. So, and of course, this is a very left-wing area of New Mexico, so they would be amenable to seeing Alec Baldwin in a positive light. Okay, let's see. Then, oh, by the way, before I get to this, there's another. Where did I put that? Oh, come on. Here we go. There is a theoretical defense that Alec Baldwin could have raised that would have made this, legally speaking, an accident, carrying no criminal liability and no civil liability. He could have claimed that he did not know he was holding a functional firearm. Now, we often confuse these words prop and firearm as if a prop means it's plastic or something. No, a prop is any physical object being used on the set. An operable car being used as part of the movie is a prop. An operable sewing machine is a prop. An operable gun is a prop. It's a prop. That's a real gun. So just to call something a prop doesn't mean it's harmless. It's a real gun. Now, of course, there are props in movies that are not real guns. They're just rubber. A lot of times they'll give the extras, like if there's a scene with lots of police, the extras are given just rubber guns, painted black. So they look real enough from a distance, but the armorer doesn't have to worry about gun safety for all those extras. Alec Baldwin could have said, I believed what I was holding was an inoperable prop, not capable of discharging a bullet. And if he said that and you believed him, then he was not engaged in reckless conduct when he pointed the muzzle at Halyna Hutchins, because he was not creating an unjustified risk of death, not knowingly creating an unjustified risk of death. So there would be no recklessness and there would be no criminal liability. Unfortunately, for Alec Baldwin, he's got an ego the size of the moon, and he thought it would be a good idea to immediately sit down and chat with a couple of police detectives immediately after the shooting. What's going through Alec Baldwin's head when he's doing this? I can only presume it's his ego. He's a big Hollywood star. He's worth millions of dollars. He's talking to two podunk town detectives, both women, and he figures his prestige and status and intelligence, I'm sure he thinks he's the most intelligent person ever, he'll be able to impress them and talk his way out of whatever trouble he might be in, or convince them of his own view, not grounded in any understanding of the law, that he shouldn't have any accountability here. So he talks to them for about an hour and a quarter. And I've gone through this interview before. It's one of the blog posts on that link, lawselfdefense.com/Baldwin. But his best legal defense here in this case would have been for him to be able to say with credibility, I thought that was an inoperable prop. I had no idea and no reason to believe that I was creating any risk whatever when I pointed what I believe to be a hunk of plastic or whatever at Halyna Hutchins. And if that were true, I'd have to agree. He wouldn't have any criminal liability. He wouldn't even have any civil liability. Who took that legal defense away from Alec Baldwin? None other than Alec Baldwin. This is about 21 or 22 minutes into his police interview. And this is what happens, people, when you're talking to detectives without a lawyer present. A lawyer sitting beside Alec Baldwin would never have let him say any of this, particularly this part. But he thinks he's a lot smarter than he is. Don't ever do this. Don't ever do this. Don't ever be talking to detectives without a lawyer present if there's any possibility that you could have some legal liability. And obviously, if you've discharged a gun and injured or killed someone, there's absolutely a possibility you can have legal liability. Yeah, this is absolutely, he thinks these girls are dummies. And when you listen to them, the questions they ask, they know exactly what words have to come out of his mouth to make him a criminal defendant. They know they're asking the right questions. These are a smart couple of gals. He does not see the danger in those questions. They're like a shark under the water and he's a swimmer. He thinks he's having a simple conversation and he's legally burying himself. So his best defense, again, I had no idea that was an actual gun. I'll listen to him here.
I think that's what she has, but many of the departments have that. And on that tray would be her, or something like that. I don't recall what exactly hers was, but they have a station that they bring to the set for her to put all of her stuff. And if the weather is cooperative, and sometimes they put it under a tent if it looks like it might rain and might even damage the property. But she has a little place she would go to. And I think she has a truck where she stores it. When they wrap, everything goes into a truck and she takes off with it. It's her responsibility to secure the prop weapons.
Everything in there.
Which are real guns. They're real guns.
Can you actually describe the gun to me?
Sorry about the humming there. I'm not sure what's wrong with the audio there, but that's why I put the words on the screen. She's responsible for the security of the prop weapons, which are real guns. They're real guns. So he knew he was holding a real gun. So he doesn't have that accident argument available to him. What a dummy. Let's see. What else did I want to share? I did have a little video clip here. Is it this here one? Let's see. I'm going to come back to that. Yeah, I covered the police interview in depth in one of the blog posts. You can find at that link. At the very beginning, too, they Mirandize him and they have him sign the form, acknowledging that he's been Mirandized. Folks, if police ever Mirandize you, you're not saying a damn word without a lawyer present. Why do you think they're doing that? They just say, well, it's standard operating procedure. We just have to kind of do this. Don't worry about it. They're putting a rope around your neck when they Mirandize you. Be aware of the risk. Oh, where's that little video clip I had? Let's see. Here it is. See if I can make this bigger. All right. So this is one of Alec's excuses, is that he never touched the trigger of the gun. Now, this is a gun. It's a single action revolver. So if the hammer is already down, you can press the trigger all you want. Nothing happens. First, you have to cock the hammer, and they call it a single action because the trigger does a single action. All it can do is release the hammer. The trigger itself cannot cock the hammer. You have to cock the hammer separately. First, cock the hammer, then press the trigger. The hammer drops, the gun goes off. A double action revolver, you can cock the hammer simply by pulling on a long trigger pull, and it moves the hammer back, and then the hammer drops. That's two actions, double action revolver. But this was a single action revolver. So the first thing that has to happen for this gun to fire is you have to pull the hammer back and cock it. Then it has a very, very light trigger. One of the things Alec Baldwin claims consistently is that he never touched the trigger. Well, we have footage of him in the minutes before the shooting of Helena Hutchins where he's rehearsing his presentation of the gun to the camera. And this is what it looks like. And this is just one example. He does it over and over and over again, and it's always the same way. So he's got the gun in the holster. He's psyching himself up, pretending to be asleep, and he's woken up by a noise, and the gun comes out. It's a little longer than it needs to be. Sorry about that. Boom. What's that? What's that? That's his finger on the trigger. I think he does it twice here. Puts it back in the holster. Same thing. Pretends to be asleep with his hand on the gun. The gun will come out. And there he is again with his finger on the trigger. So, a jury can look at that and infer that his finger was on the trigger when it discharged too, especially when the FBI said the gun would not fire unless that was the case. Now, I have a little video here from a buddy of mine. You may know, Brendan Herrera, goes by the AK guy. 3 million subscribers on YouTube. And he did a test of a identical gun to the one that Baldwin was handling. It's only about a 16-minute video. I've never heard it. So I'm going to play it as part of this show. And I will speed it up so it doesn't take quite 15 minutes. By the way, I know Brandon. We've hung out a few times. This is at his range down in the San Antonio area. Great guy, just fantastic. This was a fun range day they had recently. I've been down there for a few of those. All right. So let's listen to what Brandon has to say here. Okay, folks. So this is the point in yesterday's show where I began to play the Brandon Herrera video illustrating that a duplicate of the Colt revolver used by Alec Baldwin could not be discharged without the trigger being pressed. Again, if you'd like to see that video that YouTube has required I remove from the YouTube version of yesterday's show, just point your browser to lawofselfdefense.com/Brandon. And don't forget, Brandon's running for Congress. Pro Second Amendment would be a great addition to Congress for our team. Check him out at BrandonHerreraForCongress.com. And with that, let's continue with the remainder of yesterday's show about Alec Baldwin's reindictment. So the narrative that the gun would have discharged without Alec Baldwin having pulled the trigger is nonsense. So this is a tweet put up by Emily Miller, who I know. She's a big Second Amendment advocate and a journalist. I think she was one of the first people to get a concealed carry permit in Washington, D.C., if I recall correctly. I think she wrote a book about it. Emily Got Her Gun, or something along those lines. And she's written about the Alec Baldwin case. She's a great follow, by the way, on Twitter. So I would encourage you to follow her, Emily Miller, at Emily Miller on Twitter. And she has a URL there, emilypostnews.com. So top 10 Alec Baldwin excuses. Actually, the first and the last one are the same. I didn't pull the trigger and the trigger was never pulled. Well, I think that's debunked beyond a reasonable doubt. That's not my responsibility. Well, that's not what New Mexico law says. New Mexico law says if you're handling a gun, either in a negligent way or without due circumspection, and someone dies as a result, you've committed manslaughter. That's the definition of manslaughter. She told me to hold it. Well, you can hold a gun and not point it at somebody. Did she tell you to point it at her? Even if she had, would that relieve you of criminal liability? No. I let go of the hammer. Well, that was just debunked. I pointed the gun in a direction she wanted. That doesn't relieve you of responsibility if there's a bad outcome. You know what you could have done? You could have held it how she told you and pointed it like she told you, even if you pointed it right at her, but first taken 5 seconds to make sure there's no live rounds in the gun. Someone is responsible. I know it's not me. No, it's you. Just because other people may have responsibility too doesn't relieve you of your responsibility. They didn't get her in a car. Well, I don't know what that's supposed to mean. That doesn't relieve you of responsibility for shooting her. In any case, I believe the wound was mortal. I think it was a heart shot. The gun goes off. Well, we know the gun didn't spontaneously go off. Someone put a live bullet in a gun. And that person should be held responsible for that, for allowing live ammo into a gun on a movie set. And that's probably the armorer. And she is being prosecuted for that. But again, other people having responsibility does not relieve him, Alec Baldwin, of his own criminal responsibility. He knew he was holding a real gun, as we saw in the police interview. We know he was putting his finger on the trigger, and in fact, he had to be for the gun to discharge. And we know that it doesn't matter. It does not matter who put the bullet in the gun under New Mexico law. New Mexico Supreme Court, it could have made no difference to the trial of a charge of involuntary manslaughter as to who loaded the gun. All that is necessary to establish for involuntary manslaughter by the use of a loaded firearm is that a defendant, Alec Baldwin, had in his hands a gun which at some time had been loaded and that he handled it without due caution and circumspection, and death resulted. That is classic involuntary manslaughter under New Mexico law. Somewhat shockingly, only good for a maximum of 18 months in prison and a $5,000 fine. All right, folks. So I think I'll transition over to the Q&A portion of the show. And the Q&A portion of the show is where I guess I don't have to worry about leaving YouTube behind because they're already gone. But the Q&A portion of our shows are where we cut off the open access live streams on YouTube, Twitter, and Rumble. And we cut down to just the live stream that's on our Law Self-Defense member dashboard. The good news is it's dirt cheap to be a Law Self-Defense member. You could do it right now and participate in the Q&A for the rest of the show. You can become a 2-week trial member for 99 cents, folks. Only 99 cents at lawofselfdefense.com/trial, or scan that QR code. And after the 2-week trial membership, regular membership is still dirt cheap. It's only about 30 cents a day, less than $10 a month to be a Law Self-Defense member. But at least try it out for 2 weeks for 99 cents. Right now, open up another tab in your browser, lawofselfdefense.com/trial, and you'll be emailed instructions for how to log into our member dashboard and enjoy the rest of the show as a live stream Q&A. lawofselfdefense.com/trial. And with that, I'm going to play a little outro music for the public streams. If you're a member watching on the member dashboard, don't go anywhere. We'll be back in about 20 seconds, and we'll dig into the member Q&A. Here we go. And we're back. Just us Law of Self-Defense members now. Let me pull up my own member dashboard. It should be here somewhere. Let's see. And again, all this legal analysis on that we've done ever since the shooting happened, the day after the shooting we started, is available at that little URL in the bottom corner there, lawofselfdefense.com/Baldwin. All right. You know, the funny thing is I do live streams all the time showing, police shootings. They're handling guns in much more violent context than this. Very odd. Let's see. Robert has a comment from yesterday's show. Robert had submitted, yesterday was our Platinum Q&A show, and I had a question from Robert about a California case, People versus Murphy or whatever it was. And he had some questions about it, and I provided some answers. He wasn't able to join live, but he watched it afterwards. And he says, yes, he is an attorney, no longer lives in California, has moved to Idaho. When promoting Platinum memberships, you could add that some Platinum members are attorneys. Yeah, I know that. We have quite a few attorneys who are Platinum members. That's very kind of you. I should perhaps share that more often. Let's see. Yeah, and he's. I'll dig into that, Robert, and check. Lexus didn't have any indication of any subsequent action on that case, but I'll check. Lloyd asked a great question. I was actually, me and the wife were in the hot tub last night, and I raised this issue with her. If Alec Baldwin gets a felony conviction, what's that mean for his movie career? To the extent he still has a movie career. But assuming he still wants to be acting in movies that involve guns, virtually all the guns you see in movies are real guns, because that's the least expensive way for the movie producers to have what appear, especially in close-ups, to be real guns. I mean, in theory, I suppose you could make very real-looking replicas that were capable of firing only blanks, and maybe that's a good policy idea. Maybe somebody should do that. But they don't do that because the cost of making such a replica would be a multiple of simply going to the gun store and buying the gun. Or more practically, of course, they contract with Hollywood companies that have a warehouse full of guns, and they just basically rent the gun for the movie set. But they're invariably all real guns, except, of course, where there's like more distant shots of extras. There they might use rubber guns. But for the leading actors, when you see a gun in their hand, it's invariably a real gun. Well, if Alec Baldwin's convicted of a felony here, he's a prohibited person. Felons cannot be in possession of real guns. So he would not be able to hold a real gun in a movie without committing a felony offense, a federal felony offense. So that could be awkward. Let's see. What else? Oh, Long Island, Brooklyn. I've lived in both those places. Long Island and Brooklyn. This is interesting. Robert says, The Mirror, which I believe is a UK news publication, reports Alec Baldwin's dad was school shooting coach who died after breathing in bullet dust. Okay. I saw someone else mention that they were a student at the high school on Long Island where was that? Where Alec Baldwin's father was head of the rifle team. Believe it or not, Massapequa is on Long Island. It's a short distance outside of New York City. Largely where I grew up. It's where I went to high school, not Massapequa, but an adjacent town. And where I went to high school, we had a rifle range, a small bore rifle range for the high school rifle team in the basement under the cafeteria. That's where we shot. So it would be hard to believe that Alec Baldwin's father was essentially a small arms expert, and none of that rubbed off on Alec Baldwin. In any case, as I said earlier, he's had 30 years experience on movie sets. And getting trained every single time in gun safety, handling lots of guns. Jeffrey asks, in the indictment, why do they say on or about October 21st, 2021? Yeah, it's just common practice. Often you may not be certain of the date, and there it would make sense. Like if a body's found, were they killed today or yesterday? I mean, you may not know. It could be happened around midnight. You're not sure if it's a few minutes before midnight or after midnight, and you just get into the habit of not being overly specific about a date if you don't have to. On or about is close enough. Let's see. Yeah, Brennan would be he's such a great guy, Brennan Herrera. I mean, just such a personable, kind person, and he'd make and obviously hugely pro Second Amendment, great American. He'd be great in Congress. Russ asks, for lack of a better term, is there a chain of custody for firearms in a movie set? They're supposed to be. That's kind of what he was describing in that little clip I played of him acknowledging that this was a real gun. He was kind of describing how the guns were supposed to be managed. They would be on a cart on the set. The armorer would be standing next to the cart. When they weren't on the cart, they'd be in a van that she locked up, kept secure. And then in the evenings, the van would be parked someplace safe. But yeah, the purpose of the armorer is to prevent these kinds of things from happening. So certainly I think the armorer has legal liability here. But that, again, does not excuse Baldwin's liability. Someone says Mark Wahlberg is a felon and is in many movies with firearms. He's certainly in many movies with firearms. I don't know if he's a felon or not. I don't follow Hollywood that much, but yeah, I'm not sure how that would work. You don't get an excuse from federal persons and prohibited person in possession laws because you're an actor. If Alec Baldwin was a member of Law Self-Defense, how would you handle this? Well, he would retain local defense counsel, and I'm sure his defense counsel is excellent. I mean, he's a wealthy man, so I'm sure he's got the very best working for him. Defense counsel would call me and say, hey, Alec tells us he's a platinum member. He's guaranteed your legal consult for free. We'd like you to do a legal analysis of this case. Frankly, he doesn't need to be a platinum member because I've done the legal analysis for free, right, in the public blog posts. But that would essentially be my legal analysis. And I would note things like, well, if there had been credible evidence that he didn't know it was a gun, then that would be his best defense. But it looks to me like that can't credibly be argued. You can try to argue it now, but it wouldn't be very credible given that video clip we just saw. So I would get all the evidence. I would look at all the law. I would write up my expert legal opinion in a lengthy, detailed report, obviously much more detailed than I can do in live streams, and submit that to them. But my conclusion wouldn't be any different. My conclusion would be, to a reasonable degree of legal certainty, this looks like involuntary manslaughter under New Mexico law. And we could try to, brainstorm ways to mitigate the severity, maybe get a favorable plea deal of some kind. But, my legal analysis follows the law and the facts and is delivered to your lawyer, and then your lawyer makes what use of it he thinks best. It doesn't mean it's guaranteed to be positive. So I can turn a bad shoot into a good shoot. Let's see what else. Yeah, I don't know if YouTube's going to be a stickler about showing recordings of gun uses during a live stream, then I won't be able to do those on YouTube anymore. I'll just have, those will basically become members only content. Let's see. Jeffrey says, YouTube hates the live stream because you're attacking Alec. I think there were people in the YouTube comments who were obviously, or apparently, I should say, I think Alec Baldwin's his legal team has put together a very good PR organization that's scanning for these kinds of things, especially right after the indictment, right? Going into the comments, making all of these excuses, all of these. He's just an actor. It's not his job, blah, blah, blah. It was an accident. All that nonsense by these low follower accounts on YouTube. And yeah, of course, one of them filed, or a bunch of them probably filed a grievance with YouTube. They know that anyone who's going to be covering this is likely to be showing some kind of guns or some kind of gun use in a recorded manner, and they can complain on that basis. And it worked. It worked. So we'll have to see about that. I guess I'll have to do it. Maybe I'll do this again as a separate show that I just pre-record. I'll have to see what they say. All right, back to the questions. All right, it looks like that's about it. So, folks, thank you for taking time from your Saturday to be here with us. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to covering this trial if they hold it. If it's not televised, I may have to go down to New Mexico and stay there for the course of the trial, see if I can get into the courtroom. During which, of course, I wouldn't be able to stream it live, but I'd be able to share some personal insights from what's happening. All right, folks. So with that out of the way, I'll just remind all of you that if you carry a gun so you're hard to kill, if you carry a knife, pepper spray, study jiu-jitsu so you're hard to kill, that's why I do all those things. So that I am hard to kill, so my family is hard to kill. Then you also owe it to yourself to make sure you know the law so you're hard to convict as well. Until next time, I remain attorney Andrew Branca for Law of Self-Defense. Stay safe.